Nicole Kidman has made her first public appearance since her split from Keith Urban.
We've been through a lot together.
We've got a timeline for it now, and the time is...
She stayed silent for nearly 2 decades. Through the rehab visits, the whispered rumors, the long stretches apart, and the carefully rehearsed smiles on red carpets around the world, Nicole Kidman said nothing. She protected him. She stood by him. She chose loyalty over truth, again and again. But now, for the first time, the silence is breaking, and what is emerging paints a picture far more complicated than the fairy tale the world was sold for 19 years. This is the story of what Nicole Kidman is finally letting the world see, and why it changes everything we thought we knew about one of Hollywood's most iconic marriages. To understand where Nicole Kidman stands today, you have to understand where she came from, because her choices in love were never made in a vacuum. They were shaped by wounds that ran extraordinarily deep, wounds that began long before Keith Urban ever entered the picture. Nicole grew up in Sydney, Australia, raised in a household that valued discipline, education, and emotional resilience. Her father was a clinical psychologist, her mother a nurse and educator. From the outside, it looked like a stable, grounded upbringing, and in many ways it was. But Nicole herself has spoken over the years about a profound shyness that defined her early years, a shyness so intense that her teachers worried about her. She would flush red with embarrassment when called upon in class. She struggled to assert herself in ordinary social situations. Yet inside that shy exterior lived a fierce imagination, and she found her outlet in performance. Ballet first, then drama classes, then youth theater, each one a small step toward the woman she would eventually become. By the time she was a teenager, Australia's film industry was beginning to find its footing on the international stage, and Nicole found herself riding that wave. She was cast in television films and small productions, and then came the 1983 film BMX Bandits, which gave her early exposure to audiences. Her combination of striking looks and natural emotional depth set her apart from peers, and by the late 1980s, Hollywood was paying attention. She crossed the Pacific and never really looked back. Then came Tom Cruise, and with him, everything changed. They married in 1990, and for a period, they were the couple the entire entertainment industry orbited around. But Scientology cast a long and complicated shadow over their years together. And when the marriage ended in 2001, Nicole did not just lose a husband. She lost something far more devastating. She lost her daily life with her 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor, who remained closely connected to their father and to Scientology. Nicole has rarely spoken in explicit detail about the pain of that separation, but those close to her have described it as the defining heartbreak of her life. She felt cut off from motherhood itself. And for a woman who had always dreamed of family, of warmth and stability and belonging, that loss left a mark that simply never healed. It is impossible to understand why Nicole threw herself so completely into her marriage with Keith Urban, without understanding how desperately she needed to rebuild what had been taken from her. She was not just falling in love. She was reaching for redemption. Keith Urban arrived in her life at a moment when both of them were standing at crossroads. He had been born in New Zealand, but raised in Queensland, Australia, in a household that was far from easy. Financial pressures and family tension marked his early years, and he found his escape the same way Nicole had found hers, through performance. His was music. His father, passionate about country music, handed him a guitar at the age of 6, and something clicked immediately. By his teenage years, Keith was performing in talent shows in small venues, carving out an identity as a country musician with a rock edge. He eventually dropped out of school to pursue music full-time, because for him, there was simply no other path. He moved to Nashville in the early 1990s with big dreams and the raw talent to back them up. But fame, when it finally arrived following his breakthrough self-titled American album in 1999, brought complications he was not equipped to handle. The touring lifestyle, the temptations that came with it, and the personal demons he had been carrying since his teens all converged into a pattern of alcohol and substance abuse that would shadow him for years. He had been to rehab before he ever met Nicole. He was a man of enormous charm and extraordinary talent who was also, beneath the surface, profoundly fragile. When the two of them crossed paths at the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles in January 2005, there was something almost poetic about the timing. She had recently reclaimed her professional identity after the divorce, winning the Academy Award for her performance in The Hours, and reminding the world that she was not merely a celebrity's wife, but one of the greatest actresses of her generation. He was charming and a little reserved at their first meeting, and by her own admission, she initially thought he was not interested. He did not call for months. When he finally did, something shifted between them that neither had expected. Their romance moved with a speed that, in hindsight, speaks to how much both of them needed it to be real. By mid-2005, they were photographed together. By November, he was walking red carpets as her partner. And in June 2006, they married at a chapel in Sydney, with a ceremony that the press described in almost dreamlike terms. She wore a Balenciaga gown. He serenaded her at the reception. It was exactly the kind of love story that makes people want to believe again. But the fairy tale cracked almost immediately. 4 months after the wedding, Keith checked himself into a rehabilitation facility for alcohol abuse. Nicole had barely settled into married life when she found herself navigating her husband's addiction crisis. The tabloids were brutal, framing her as naive and him as a lost cause. She responded by doing exactly what she had always done when the world got loud and cruel. She went quiet. She stood by him. She visited him in rehab. She did not give the press what they were hungry for. He later said, more than once, that she saved his life during that period. And the Nicole who showed up for him during those weeks was not just a wife fulfilling a duty. She was someone who had already experienced the devastation of a family falling apart. And she was absolutely determined that this time things would be different. If she could be strong enough, patient enough, loving enough, she could hold this together. That belief drove her for years. What followed was nearly 2 decades of what appeared from the outside to be a genuinely loving and functional partnership. They welcomed 2 daughters, Sunday Rose in 2008 and Faith Margaret in 2010. Keith won Grammy Awards. Nicole took on roles that challenged and moved audiences around the world. They talked about each other in interviews with unmistakable warmth. He would tear up thanking her at award shows. She described him as a person who had brought her back to life. Fans adored them. The press celebrated them. They became, almost by accident, the living proof that love in Hollywood could actually last. But people who were close to them during those years described something more complicated underneath the warmth. Nicole carried enormous emotional weight in that marriage. She was the organizer, the planner, the steady hand. She managed not just her own career, but the rhythms of their family life, the schedules, the children's schooling, the public image. She was, by nearly all accounts, the one holding things together. And for a long time, she did it without complaint, because she loved him and because she believed in what they were building. Keith, meanwhile, was a man whose nature pulled him in a different direction. He thrived on the road, on the energy of performance, on the freedom that touring gave him. He was a fun parent, the spontaneous one, the one who resisted routine. In small doses, those qualities balanced Nicole's intensity beautifully. Over 19 years, that same imbalance became a source of quiet friction that wore both of them down. By the early 2020s, those who paid close attention began to notice that something had shifted. Nicole's interviews, always carefully worded, started to carry a new undercurrent. She spoke more frequently about the importance of hard work and relationships, about sacrifice and compromise. The words were diplomatic, but to anyone listening closely, they carried the weight of a woman who was tired in ways she was not quite ready to name publicly. Keith's concert performances, meanwhile, began to take on a confessional quality. He poured himself into his music with an emotional rawness that his audiences responded to enormously, but that also suggested a man working through something significant. Paparazzi photographs began to tell their own story. Nicole appeared at events alone more frequently. Keith was photographed without his wedding ring during tour dates. Neither of them addressed these observations directly, and the absence of explanation only intensified speculation. Then, in late September 2025, Nicole filed for divorce in Davidson County, Tennessee, citing irreconcilable differences. The marriage was over. The filing itself was understated, almost businesslike in its language. But the details within the documents revealed how carefully Nicole had thought through what came next. She sought primary residential custody of Sunday and Faith, with Keith retaining joint decision-making authority. Neither party sought spousal support or child support, indicating that their finances had been managed separately for some time. These were not the decisions of someone who had acted impulsively. This was a woman who had thought it through and made her choice with characteristic precision. Keith's response was far more public, and in its own way, far more revealing. Shortly after the divorce news broke, he appeared at a concert in Pennsylvania as part of his High and Alive World Tour, and what unfolded on that stage became one of the most talked-about moments in recent celebrity news. He walked out without his wedding ring. He altered the lyrics to one of his signature songs, changing a line from the 2004 track, "You'll Think of Me," in a way that many interpreted as a pointed reference to the breakdown of his marriage. He removed another song from his setlist entirely, one that had been closely associated with Nicole, effectively erasing a piece of their shared history from his performance. He also spoke openly between songs about his childhood, about the journey that had brought him to music, as though grounding himself in something solid before the uncertainty that lay ahead. Whether intentional or not, Keith's behavior on that stage revealed something that Nicole has never had to say out loud: his emotional volatility, his tendency to process pain publicly rather than privately, his difficulty separating his personal life from his professional one. These were all things she had lived with and quietly managed for nearly 2 decades. In the hours and days following that concert, much of the public narrative shifted. People who had previously viewed their split as simply two people growing apart began to look more carefully at the dynamic that had existed within the marriage. Nicole, by contrast, appeared at a film festival in the weeks following the filing looking composed, measured, and clear-eyed. She did not make statements. She did not alter anything. She simply showed up and let her presence speak for itself. The contrast with Keith's concert was striking enough to say more than any interview ever could. What Nicole is exposing through her actions is not a scandal in the traditional sense. There are no explosive revelations, no dramatic confrontations being played out in the press. What she is revealing is something subtler and in many ways more significant. She is showing who she has always been beneath the carefully constructed image of the devoted wife and healer. She is a woman of immense self-possession who spent 19 years directing enormous amounts of energy towards sustaining a marriage, raising 2 daughters with stability and love, and protecting a man she genuinely cared for from both himself and from public judgment. And she is also showing, simply by choosing to file and to move forward, that there's a point at which self-preservation must come before loyalty. She stayed through the first rehab crisis. She stayed through the long separations and the scheduling conflicts and the quiet tensions over parenting styles and personal needs. She stayed through years of whispering tabloids and learned to smile on red carpets with a fluency that most people could not distinguish from genuine happiness. But eventually, the cost became too high. People close to her have noted that one of the most painful aspects of the divorce, for Nicole, was the knowledge that she had been here before. Losing Isabella and Connor during her divorce from Tom Cruise was a wound she never fully recovered from. One of her central motivations in building a life with Keith had been the chance to create the kind of stable family she had lost. Now, with Sunday and Faith, she is protecting that above everything else. The divorce documents make her priorities unmistakably clear, and so do the photographs of her walking hand in hand with her daughters through Nashville in the weeks that followed. There is something important to acknowledge in all of this, which is that the story of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban is not simply a story of one person being wronged and another being at fault. Both of them brought deep wounds into this marriage. Both of them contributed to what it became, and both of them are navigating its end in ways that reflect their very different natures. He processes pain loudly, through performance, through music, through gestures that spill out in front of thousands of people. She processes it quietly, through structure, through her children, through the controlled and deliberate way she moves through the world. Neither way is wrong, but they were, in the end, incompatible in ways that 19 years of effort could not fully resolve. What Nicole Kidman is exposing, perhaps more than anything else, is the truth that even the most sincere and committed love cannot always bridge the gap between two fundamentally different people. She loved Keith Urban, by all available evidence. She loved him deeply and fought hard for their marriage. But love, as she is now demonstrating, is not always enough on its own. Sometimes the most honest and courageous thing a person can do is to acknowledge that and to choose a different path forward. She spent nearly 2 decades being someone's anchor. Now, it appears she is choosing to simply be herself. And for a woman who once described herself as a painfully shy girl who found her voice through performance, that may be the most powerful role she has ever stepped into.